Hey kids, today we're going to talk about how to be culturally sensitive, aka watch yourself. Number 1, watch your mouth. We're going to talk a little bit about vocalics today. Not only do we have to be aware of what we say, but also how we say it. Noticing kind of how we look at tones and the different ways that people talk. In an article by Thackeray and Gills, published in 1981, called They Are So They Spoke, Non-Content Speech Stereotypes, kind of talks about the norms and expectations. They noticed that we have a tendency to feel comfortable with people who have similar speech patterns as us. So that can be pretty much native English speakers if you're from America. But those who have different speech patterns than us can maybe seem more aggressive, and because they're kind of more foreign, we get uncomfortable. And there was a study talking about how we negatively judged accented speakers, and specifically looking at those from Mexican descent. They noticed that those with a Spanish accent, those who are native English speakers, tended to feel less comfortable, and they also judged them really poorly. And they judged them negatively on attractiveness as well as education. Number 2, watch your eyes. So we're going to talk a little bit about oculesics and the differing with eye contact. So Western culture and Eastern culture can tend to be different with how we see eye contact. So for Western culture, the way that I'm looking right now is really important when we communicate. So giving full eye contact when you're having a conversation seems to communicate politeness and respect. So in an article called Attention to Eye Contact in the West and East, Autonomic Responses and Evaluative Ratings by Akechi, Sunju, Yubu, Kikuchi, and Hasagawa, they talked about how Japanese tend to give less eye contact. And actually how Western Europeans tend to focus more on the mouth, and Japanese tend to focus on eye contact. Eye aversion is a sign of respect. In another article called The Foundations of Transcultural Nursing and Healthcare, so actually a nursing journal article, there's a chapter on intercultural communication and nonverbals, written by Eubanks, McFarland, Mixer, Muniz, and some other people that I will list down here. They explored what nonverbal communication looks like in the healthcare system, specifically cross-culturally. And they explored eye contact and a couple other things such as artifacts and environment, but they talked about how different cultures may differ in how we give and receive eye contact. And so if you give direct eye contact to some cultures, like we were talking about in Japanese culture, it can actually appear somewhat aggressive and disrespectful and rude. So being conscious of that, that not everyone uses eye contact the same way. I have a friend who grew up in Rwanda, and he had to learn how to make eye contact with people because it's just not something that you do. Number 3, watch the time. Chronetics. So we're going to talk about monochronism and polychronism and how there's a tendency for different cultures to view time a different way. So in American culture, we have a tendency to be very punctual. We see time very literally, and it's kind of a politeness factor. In an article called What is the Meaning of On Time? The Sociocultural Nature of Punctuality by White, Valk, and Daimi, they actually explored a couple different cultures. So what they considered Anglo culture, so probably white Western America, punctuality was really important to them. So it was also very important to German culture and Moroccan culture, but in Latin America or Navajo Native American, Indonesian, time was very fluid. It was more about the tasks and relationship rather than showing punctuality as a way of respect or politeness. And it's really interesting how we see time being very literal. So those who are monochronic versus polychronic, we see time as a commodity. We see efficiency as a priority, and we see speed as a priority, whereas maybe those who are polychronic see time as a very fluid, holistic thing, where they care more about relationships, and it seems almost a little bit more freeing. But recognizing that not everyone views time the same way. So when we might see a student who might be an international student coming from a different culture and they're not completely on time, it's interesting how we use American education systems and we penalize them for that difference. So having to adjust to that is a little bit difficult. I'm a person that really likes to be on time, but I have a friend who grew up in India, and he does not see time the same way. So oftentimes he might be late to something or not realize that he has to be somewhere at a certain time, but time just means something different to him. He's often probably too busy having a conversation with someone, and then he shows up to something late, but it doesn't mean that he doesn't care about it. Number 4, watch your hands. Looking at proxemics and haptics. So in an article called Sociocultural Conventions in Avatar-Mediated Nonverbal Communication, a Cross-Cultural Analysis of Virtual Proxemics, written by Hazier and Friedman, they talked a little bit about the nonverbal expectancy violation theory. Same thing as expectancy violation theory. If you happen to have your expectations violated, there is oftentimes a negative response. And so when something happens nonverbally that you didn't expect, there's often a negative experience happening there, especially for those from a different culture. When you violate their expectations of what is supposed to happen with proxemics, so distance or touch, you'll probably have a bad reaction. In high contact cultures, it seems to be more sensory, so high sensory, and so being at closer quarters, closer proxemically, and touch is more common. Whereas if you are in a low contact culture, it's less sensory, and there's larger interpersonal distance in conversations. In high contact cultures, that oftentimes can be a little bit more touchy. In Arabic, Southern European, Latin America, or Southern America, there's a tendency for closer distance, people who are really huggy. For low contact cultures, that can tend to be North America, surprisingly, which I feel like is getting less so. Northern Europe, Western Europe, and Asian countries. We have this idea of what we want as a personal distance between us when we have a conversation, or even what we consider to be our space. So when we're on the bus, how we can tend to want a certain type of distance, and we get uncomfortable when we're at really close quarters, versus in other places where rubbing shoulders is very common. Number 5, watch yourself. Essentially, do your research. When you go into a different culture, or even just in general, I think the misconception in America is that we don't have to do research because this is where we live. But in recognizing that some people don't communicate the same way, especially non-verbally, I think it's really important. So, big tip here. Don't be ethnocentric. But not everyone is like you, and not everyone is going to respond the same way as you. Our gestures aren't the same. Our facial expressions might not be the same. The way we express emotions might not be the same. How we experience touch or proxemics. I like a lot of distance. Some people prefer less distance between the two of you. And I feel like communication accommodation theory is a really, really helpful thing, whether you engage in convergence or in divergence. So convergence, will you adapt your communication style based off of who you're around, or will you diverge and just like not try at all? Try to be very obvious that you are different. Is it a sign of respect if you try to converge with their communication style? Is it awkward? Probably. Being conscious of high context and low context cultures. In America, we engage in low context culture, so everything is spelled out for you. You say what you mean, the meaning is in the message. Whereas high context cultures is very oftentimes the message is within the environment. Read the room. So oftentimes you won't be able to know what the situation is unless you have been in it before or you were informed before. My family is kind of high context. So when my mom says, don't do the dishes, she really would appreciate if you did the dishes, but she'll tell you not to do the dishes. She'll even take the dish away from you. If you do the dishes for her, she will love you. That's something that you wouldn't have known unless you maybe have been in an Asian household before. So today we talked about how to be culturally sensitive, aka watch yourself. Number 1 was watch your mouth. Number 2 was watch your eyes. Number 3, watch your clock. Number 4, watch your hands, or wash your hands, whatever you want. Number 5, watch yourself. Just honestly being conscious of the fact that people do things differently and not judging them. I think the biggest thing is to not judge them and to think, my way is the right way, and being sensitive to the fact that different cultures do different things, and that we are not the center of it all. Jesus is the center of it all.